Mentioned the Eala impact. How would you sum it up? Describe her impact on this tournament.
Yeah, it was just unprecedented. You know, we've never seen anything like that in Toronto before. It was unexpected. We saw the momentum build from February in Doha and over the past year. And it really culminated in the week of, which every match she played, it sold out.
Sa loob ng ilang linggo, parang tennis na.
Another standard WTA 1000 tournament is anticipated to be held in Cincinnati. Rather, Eala'S is the subject of an incredibly surprising development. The entire tennis world can no longer ignore the atmosphere created by the influx of Filipino spectators at the event. This is the unexpected part, though. It goes beyond just one up-and-coming star winning games. Fans, players, and even the tournament itself are reacting in ways that make it impossible to ignore the larger picture that is emerging. Somehow, it all starts with Eala'S. A casual tennis enthusiast has witnessed what Alexandra Eala has accomplished in the Middle East and Australia this year. Everywhere she has gone, she has drawn large crowds that consistently support her. However, Jess summed it up best when she noted that the attendance at her post-match award ceremony on a Monday was incredible. With all the delays on Sunday, it is difficult to accomplish that. The arrival of Eala'S Eala somehow changed the WTO in the center of Cincinnati, where there are less than 2,000 Filipinos. 1,000 into something more akin to a national holiday celebration from Manila than a typical tennis event, and the sheer magnitude of it left seasoned observers questioning whether local population estimates had been drastically understated. I believe that people are misinterpreting the intensity of Eala'S Eala's supporters as an attack on the other player, which I don't believe. And I didn't notice that at all in the DC crowd. It's so much more fun to watch from the stands as a spectator. Furthermore, they're not treating the gamer disrespectfully, as you mentioned. The only thing you could say, I suppose, would be to cheer. Tennis attendance has historically followed a fairly predictable formula. Look at the local demographics, calculate the size of the relevant fan base, and anticipate that the crowd will mirror those numbers. However, in Cincinnati, Eala'S Eala upset that formula. Her support among Filipinos increased to a level that appeared to be on par with areas like Toronto, where there are hundreds of thousands of Filipino residents. Even seasoned tennis spectators questioned whether they had truly underestimated Eala'S reach in light of the unanticipated disparity between the local populace and the crowd's response. Hi, I just returned home after attending the Cincinnati Open for the past 4 days. Additionally, I intended to provide an update on my visit, see Eala'S Eala, attend the press briefings, and have a conversation with her. I believe you can view her news conference on the YouTube channel. I posed a few queries to her. I slipped in a bit of Tagalog. I'll put the answers somewhere here. We know she's an elephant, though, which is why I wanted to talk here. Those veterans witnessed the stands fill with flags, chanting, and enthusiasm that just defied convention. And in a way that felt almost personally offensive to anyone who had spent years trusting the numbers rather than the noise, they had to face the unsettling possibility that their meticulously built statistical frameworks had just been rendered obsolete by one rising player and her surprisingly devoted following. The Eala'S Eala impact was evident in our Filipino community, as thousands of flags were waved and new fans participated in the event. Additionally, Leylah Fernandez defeated the world's fifth-ranked player to go to the round of 16. Other Canadians advance, and Vicky Mboko even visited the event site to interact with the spectators. All of our partners and players have been incredibly engaged. The activations were also well attended and well engaged off-site. The phenomenon went far beyond any typical community rally because Eala has developed a crossover audience of people who attend because they are emotionally invested in her personal journey of resilience and openness, a story that cuts through the meticulously polished presentation of professional sports and hits with the impact of an unexpected plot twist inside an otherwise predictable season, rather than because of ancestral duty or shared nationality. In Cincinnati, the impact was especially dramatic because the relatively small local base should have produced subdued sessions, but the courtside volume and visual energy revealed a completely different reality where the underdog story had somehow spread across state lines and cultural boundaries, making the entire venue feel as though it belonged to a far larger and more passionate city. Fans who had never shown much interest in tennis suddenly found themselves following her matches, traveling to tournaments, and creating an atmosphere so intense that it felt less like casual sports spectatorship. The intensity of the Filipino players at the US Open will be comparable to that of the South Americans in Miami for Fonseca. They will get even more obsessed with Eala. These must be the two largest tennis fan bases at the moment, don't they? The Filipinos for Eala and the Brazilians for Fonseca, or more accurately, anyone for Eala at the moment. I feel like I know a few Filipinos, and I literally always say, "Hey, do you guys know Alex Eala?" Yes, we are aware of her. I take it that she plays tennis. She comes first, followed by the sport she participates in. After Eala defeated a former Wimbledon champion in a hard-fought victory in Washington, D.C., she allowed herself a moment of unfiltered emotion that quickly spread across social media and reached viewers who had never watched a professional tennis match before, but suddenly felt determined to understand the difference between a forehand and a backhand simply because the sincerity on display seemed more genuine than most television. That expression of vulnerability broke through the familiar polished athlete persona and created an instant sense of intimacy that made distant observers feel as though they were witnessing a typical sporting event that was packaged for maximum inspirational impact. The scene's emotional honesty struck a chord because it contrasted sharply with most players' controlled media training of a young competitor facing the demands of the tour while bearing the hopes of an entire country in a way that somehow made each subsequent game feel like a new chapter in a narrative that viewers had already decided to follow until the very end. I have no idea how the Eala frenzy will grow, but it will continue. It simply is. I'm not sure whether things can get any better. Even Christopher Nolan could not have directed her personal odyssey. 3 of the best seeds, correct? She also defeats Osaka, a 4-time major champion. She defeats Fernandez, the reigning champion and the final WTA 1000 winner, Vitalina. After that, the top seed in the championship game overcame a set deficit. Yes, and she had a lot of success winning the title by defeating Pegula 6-0 in the last match. Because she grew up in training surroundings devoid of the opulent facilities and limitless resources experienced by many of her colleagues, her backstory strengthens this bond. Her quest has become a shared purpose for admirers who feel they are witnessing an underdog change the expected narrative in real time due to the disparity between her limited infrastructure and her success. Supporters describe a sense of involvement as though every hard-fought victory confirms the collective belief that talent and determination can overcome structural disadvantages. This feeling felt more like a home crowd than a neutral stop on the North American hardcourt swing, while also demonstrating that elite coaching centers and climate-controlled courts are not the only routes to relevance on the biggest stages. She's clearly broadcasting the match to an entire archipelago where she's creating a new community, and her fans probably enjoy watching tennis enough now to have other favorites as well, given that the noise level reached the point where more seasoned players looked around as if looking for the hidden microphone. She sells a lot of tickets, so I think it's fantastic and obviously excellent for the event. The demographic that Alex is bringing to tennis is fantastic, and because we are all gaining from it, I believe that we should all embrace it. The persistent energy and increasing number of non-Filipino faces in the stands suggests something deeper and more lasting than a gathering of expatriates looking for a familiar accent or sharing comfort food between sets, forcing industry observers who previously saw such turnout as nothing more than fleeting diaspora excitement to re-evaluate their assessments. Even though Eala'S ranking climbs and her increasingly hard schedule would typically create a bigger distance between athlete and audience, her real personality and good on-court performances seem to be the foundation of the crossover appeal. Fans relate to the perseverance required to compete every week while still permitting genuine. In a sporting environment where many athletes treat every public appearance as a highly orchestrated brand exercise, the combination of competitive intensity and emotional transparency has become extraordinarily captivating. Ironically, highlighting the personal cost of the journey has increased her appeal in a sport that often rewards stoicism. People who might have otherwise disregarded the technical subtleties of serve percentages and ground strokes are now debating match strategy as if they had followed the tour for decades. I believe there are a few things that spring to mind, but remember that no culture can be summed up in a few words. Filipino culture, like all cultures, is, in my opinion, extremely multilayered. Community, family, hospitality, love, and kindness are what spring to me when I think of Filipino culture because it is constantly changing. Thus, the images in Cincinnati signify much more than a brief increase in attendance. Because they show how a tennis player from a country that is still building its infrastructure can have an impact that goes well beyond the confines of any particular local community and can do so consistently enough to turn isolated surprises into an emerging pattern that requires serious explanation. A feedback loop was created by the flags and the noise and the prolonged focus on her matches. Her performance seemed to be strengthened by the obvious support, and the crowd's emotional investment was deepened at the same time, until the whole atmosphere felt self-reinforcing and almost detached from the tournament's official branding. Instead of the quiet midweek sessions that veterans had expected, they had to deal with crowded stands and more media attention. The surprise was perceived as both professional curiosity and an acknowledgement that the outdated predictive models needed to be revised before the next event on the schedule made them even less relevant. Regardless of official census data, what once seemed to be an oddity in Toronto now resembles a pattern that follows Eala from city to city. Furthermore, the pattern's recurrence has come to seem less like a coincidence and more like proof of a fundamental shift in the way audiences allocate their limited free time and emotional energy. I don't want to use the word historic, but as someone who was born in the Philippines and raised in Canada, seeing Layla and Alex here makes me feel a little emotional because it's something that happens all the time. However, tennis is such a competitive sport that you wouldn't think the Philippines was such a powerhouse. Because digital access allows emotional moments to spread instantly and convert casual viewers into devoted followers without requiring physical proximity to major diaspora communities or expensive travel budgets that previously restricted such growth, this trend also reveals a broader transformation in how today's sports audiences develop. One such pivotal moment was the Washington Tears, and subsequent games have reinforced the sense that something genuine is emerging rather than a manufactured story crafted by a marketing staff adhering to a list of motivational moments. Fans relate to the modesty of her upbringing and the obvious effort required to compete at this level, and they use that connection to show up in person whenever the tour allows them to see her. Even if getting to her requires traveling across state lines and rearranging work schedules with a kind of commitment typically saved for significant finals or long-standing personal rivalries. For those keeping an eye on the business side of the sport and now having to explain to colleagues why traditional attendance models failed so dramatically in a market that should have been relatively predictable, Cincinnati simply made the discrepancy between projected and actual turnout particularly evident. I think it's fantastic. As I was returning from my match on the little go-kart, I noticed that the practice court was packed. "Who's practicing right now?" I asked. "She hasn't even taken the court yet, though." I thought, when I saw the Filipino flags. However, I believe it's fantastic. They treat the supporters with such kindness. Some of them were on my court supporting me, and because I believe she's playing late tonight, I felt incredibly appreciative. The collective investment turns every rally into a shared experience that transcends the scoreboard and turns courteous applause into something akin to communal release whenever a challenging point goes in Eala'S favor, creating an environment that leaves little room for the typical detachment of a neutral tournament. The emotional energy inside the venue proved contagious, blurring the line between core community support and wider public interest until the distinction itself started to seem academic rather than practical. This was especially true for spectators who came merely out of curiosity. Eala'S ability to generate that atmosphere stems from the way her public persona always aligns with the underdog story that her followers find so captivating, as well as the seeming lack of any deliberate effort to establish relatability for the cameras. Although she doesn't appear to use vulnerability for dramatic purpose, when it does surface, it feels real and is consequently more potent than the meticulously produced performances that occasionally rule the larger sports entertainment scene. Growing awareness that some athletes can change attendance expectations through the power of their own narrative rather than the size of any established fan following is a result of the cumulative influence across the North American swing. Additionally, this realization affects how broadcasters distribute coverage in markets that were previously thought to be secondary, as well as how tournaments handle marketing. It's astounding to me that young Filipino boys and girls can now understand that it's possible to be a world-class tennis player and to fly the flags of both Canada and the Philippines. It's also amazing that they can share that love and be in Toronto. I wanted to mention that Michelle and I are visitors to this city. Every year, we travel here for the National Bank Open, but we are visitors to this city because we adore Canada and this competition. However, it's primarily about what Alex has done. Everyone is inspired to be somewhat Filipino by her. Because the local numbers rendered the accomplishment statistically implausible, the Cincinnati chapter stands out. However, what transpired on the ground defied probability, compelling even the most data-driven experts to admit that human connection still has the capacity to subdue pure mathematics. Once heavily relying on demographic maps, observers are now looking at emotional resonance and storytelling strengths as additional variables. This represents a subtle evolution in how the sport understands its audience, even if the realization causes professional discomfort due to the failure to identify those signals sooner. There was much more to the people that crowded those stands than just cheering. They demonstrated that connections might grow in ways that conventional models were unable to foresee, and the shock experienced by seasoned professionals is merely the result of such models being overwhelmed by new data that keeps accumulating with each new incident. The prevalent wisdom may have been misinterpreted as the trip progresses. The idea that tennis must stay spatially constrained by the size of small communities or the historical strength of national tennis programs is undermined by each repetition of the statistical surprise, the expanding audiences, and the building energy. Even though you're still very young and unfamiliar with this, the spotlight that has been placed on you is extremely burdensome. Right now, is it just enjoyable or is it heavy for you? It might be both, in my opinion. No, it can be hefty at times. Sometimes it's enjoyable. I'm just trying to process everything because, at the end of the day, I know that it's a bizarre experience. In the end, the takeover of those Cincinnati courts was more about the silent power of a narrative that people felt was worth seeing firsthand than it was about any organized migration. And the ensuing spectacle made the conventional experts re-evaluate almost everything they believed to be true about the workings of fandom. The admirers, however, continued to show up as if those computations were the sole property of someone else. After the final point is decided and the final flag is dropped, the professional circuit's expectations are subtly reshaped, making it impossible to write off the prospect of unexpected, overwhelming support as a coincidence or fleeting curiosity. While broadcasters adjust their cameras to capture faces that arrived without any planned marketing campaign behind them, tournament administrators now have the unique problem of preparing for crowds that gather based on emotional connection rather than population data. This change implies that the audience landscape may be less influenced by long-standing national tennis customs for the upcoming generation of competitors.